The old alien grandpa stood in the corner of the crowded spaceport, his body bent, his eyes tired, and his hands shaking as he tried to hold a bag that looked far too heavy for him. Most people walked past without giving him a second glance. Some even laughed at the way he struggled, calling him weak and useless. But the human traveler stopped. He was not in a hurry like the others. He bent down and asked softly if the old man needed help. The grandpa looked up slowly, his eyes bright despite his frail body. "One small favor," he said in a low voice. "Carry this bag to my home. My bones are not strong enough anymore." The human nodded without hesitation. He lifted the bag, surprised at its weight. It was not just heavy, it felt strange, as if the contents were pulling at him, almost alive. They began walking through the dusty colony streets. The human noticed that some aliens stepped back when they saw the grandpa. Their faces turned pale, but no one said a word. The air around them felt heavy, almost as if shadows followed wherever the old man walked. The human tried to ignore it, keeping his focus on carrying the bag. "Why do you carry this burden alone?" the human asked. The grandpa gave a tired smile. "It is not the first time I have carried heavy things. Once I carried the weight of entire worlds. Now I only carry memories." The human frowned, confused, but the old man said no more. He only muttered in a language the human did not understand, strange whispers that made the air colder. The human glanced at the bag again. Symbols were carved into the metal pieces sticking out from the broken seam. He had seen those symbols before, in history archives. They belonged to the fleets of the old galactic war, fleets that were said to have vanished forever. The human wanted to ask, but something in the grandpa's silence warned him not to. Instead, he tightened his grip and walked faster. The streets grew quieter as they reached the edge of the colony. The grandpa's home stood alone, old and worn, its walls covered with dust. "Here," the grandpa whispered. "You may leave the bag inside." The human stepped through the door. The house smelled of age, filled with relics and old star charts. He placed the bag gently on the ground. The moment he did, the floor seemed to hum, as though the house itself recognized what had been brought inside. The human stepped back, startled. The grandpa's eyes glowed faintly for a moment. He looked younger, stronger, as if the weight had been lifted from his soul. "You have done more than you know," he said softly. The human was about to ask what he meant when the ground began to tremble. At first, it felt like distant thunder, but soon the whole colony shook. Outside, alarms blared. People screamed and ran to shelters. The human rushed to the door, looking up at the sky. His heart froze. Above the colony, the stars were vanishing, blotted out by shadows. One by one, massive warships descended, dark shapes cutting across the heavens. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each marked with the same symbol the human had seen on the bag. Whispers filled the streets. "It can't be. They were gone. They were destroyed centuries ago." But here they were, the strongest fleet the galaxy had ever known. Their engines roared like storms, their weapons glowed with power. Every citizen dropped to the ground in terror, certain the end had come. Yet the ships did not fire. They did not attack. Instead, they moved with perfect formation, circling the colony like guardians. The human stared, unable to breathe. The ships aligned, pointing directly at the grandpa's small house. A deep voice echoed from the sky, carried through every communicator at once. "Commander, we have returned." The human turned slowly. The grandpa was no longer bent or shaking. He stood straight, his eyes blazing with the strength of a forgotten age. The frail old man was gone. In his place stood someone who had commanded the most powerful fleet in history. Soldiers in ancient armor began to descend from the ships, landing in rows outside the house. They marched with perfect discipline, their banners shining with the old war symbol. The entire colony watched in silence as thousands of warriors dropped to their knees, their voices rising together. "Hail the Supreme Commander." The human's mind raced. He realized now that the favor had not been simple at all. Carrying the bag had awakened something buried for centuries. He looked at the grandpa, who now stood tall among the kneeling army, and shivers ran down his spine. The old man turned his gaze toward the human. "You carried more than a bag today," he said in a voice that shook the air. "You carried the key to destiny." The sky burned with the light of warships, the ground trembled beneath the weight of soldiers, and the human understood that a storm far greater than anything he had imagined was about to begin. And it had all started with one small favor. The ground was still shaking when the human stepped outside, his eyes fixed on the sky that had turned almost black with the shadows of warships. The engines roared above the colony like thunder that never ended. People screamed. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ships were everywhere, stretching from horizon to horizon. The human's heart pounded. He had read about these ships in history books, about the fleet that once controlled the galaxy, a fleet that had vanished after the Great War. Every empire feared it. Every ruler spoke of it as a legend to frighten children. Yet here it was, alive, massive, and more terrifying than he could imagine. He turned toward the grandpa, expecting to see the weak, trembling figure again. But the old alien was different now. He stood straight, his shoulders square, his eyes burning with a fire that made even the soldiers hesitate. The wrinkles on his face seemed less deep, and his voice carried far more strength when he spoke. "Stay close to me," he told the human. The human nodded, though his legs felt heavy with fear. From above, a single enormous ship moved forward, larger than any building in the colony. Its hull glowed with old scars, marks of battles fought centuries ago. A beam of light shot down, and within seconds, an entire company of armored soldiers descended. Their boots struck the ground at the same time, shaking the colony with their landing. Each soldier wore ancient armor of dark steel, glowing with blue lines of power. They carried weapons taller than the human himself. The people watching from the streets gasped in terror, believing death had come. But then something shocking happened. The soldiers dropped to one knee. Thousands of them, lined up in rows, kneeling before the frail-looking house where the grandpa stood. Their leader stepped forward, removing his helmet. His face was scarred, his eyes sharp, and his voice deep as he shouted, "Supreme Commander, your fleet awaits your order." The words echoed across the colony. Silence followed. The human felt the air freeze. Everyone stared at the grandpa with wide eyes. The old alien, who had seemed so weak only minutes ago, lifted his hand slowly. The soldiers pounded their fists against their chests in unison. The sound like a war drum shaking the ground. The human could not believe what he was seeing. This man had been ignored by everyone in the spaceport. People laughed at him, pushed past him as if he was useless. And now thousands of warriors were kneeling at his feet. The grandpa's voice was calm, but filled with power. "Rise!" The soldiers stood as one, their armor clashing like thunder. The human felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His thoughts raced. Why had the old man asked him for help? Why carry the bag? Why now? None of it made sense, but deep inside, he knew the answer was not simple. As if reading his thoughts, the grandpa turned his head slightly and spoke softly to him. "You wonder why, don't you? Why you?" The human swallowed hard, unable to reply. "You will know soon," the grandpa said. "But remember this, fate chooses those who act without hesitation. You carried the weight when others looked away." Before the human could answer, a sudden noise cracked through the sky. Alarms screamed again, this time from the colony's defense towers. A different fleet was approaching, sleeker ships painted in the colors of the ruling empire. They were not here to protect. They were here to challenge. From the colony's loudspeakers came a warning. Unidentified warships have entered restricted airspace. All civilians remain indoors. This is a direct violation of treaty law. The human looked back up. He counted dozens of enemy ships cutting through the sky, their weapons already glowing. They were smaller than the old fleet's warships, but newer, faster, armed with the latest technology. The human expected the grandpa's fleet to fire, to strike first, but they did not move. Instead, they remained in perfect formation, waiting silently. The discipline was chilling. A voice crackled over the comms from the Empire's fleet. "This is the authority of the High Council. Identify yourselves or be destroyed." The old grandpa raised his head, his eyes narrowing. He gave no answer, but his soldiers shifted their stance, ready for battle. The human felt his stomach twist. He knew if war started here, the colony would be turned to ash in seconds. Millions of lives could be lost. He grabbed the grandpa's arm. "You can't fight here. The people..." The grandpa's eyes softened for a moment as he looked at the human. You think I would allow harm to those who sheltered me? Before the human could respond, the grandpa raised his hand again, signaling to his fleet. And in perfect silence, the warships shifted, spreading into a protective circle around the colony. Their shields flared to life, wrapping the city in a glowing dome. Gasps erupted from the people hiding in the streets. They were not being attacked. They were being defended. The Empire's fleet hesitated, their weapons still glowing, but their captains uncertain. The human looked at the grandpa with disbelief. This was no random act of power. The old man had revealed himself on purpose, and whatever came next would decide the future of the entire galaxy. The sky was split between two fleets, old and new, both powerful, both ready to fire. The human stood frozen, knowing he was standing at the center of something far greater than himself. And then the Empire's commander gave a single command through the comms. Open fire. The first blast lit up the sky like a second sun. The Empire's fleet opened fire without hesitation. Blue energy beams cut through the clouds, striking the old fleet's shields. The dome around the colony shuddered, rippling like water struck by stones. The people screamed, clutching one another, expecting the end. But the shields held. Not a single shot reached the colony. The ancient warships above glowed brighter, their engines awakening with a low hum that shook the ground. The human covered his ears as the sound of energy cannons echoed across the horizon. He looked at the grandpa, but the old man stood calm, his eyes sharp, his body still. He raised one hand, and instantly the old fleet answered. Dozens of massive ships broke formation, their cannons glowing with fire older than the Empire itself. With one command, they released their fury. The counterattack was terrifying. Thick beams of red and gold ripped through space, slicing enemy ships like paper. One Imperial cruiser exploded in a flash of white light, breaking apart into debris. Another was torn in half before it could even turn its shields forward. The human gasped. He had never seen destruction so fast, so final. These ancient warships, thought to be outdated, fought like gods of war. But the Empire's fleet did not retreat. More ships jumped into orbit, doubling their numbers. Their formations were perfect, their tactics sharp. The sky filled with explosions as the two fleets clashed. The colony shook with each impact. Dust rained from buildings and alarms continued to wail. Families huddled in dark corners, children crying. Everyone thought this was the end of their world. And through it all, the grandpa remained steady. The human turned to him, his voice shaking. "Who are you? What are you?" The grandpa did not look at him. His eyes stayed on the sky. "I am no one, only a memory the galaxy tried to bury." "But they called you commander," the human pressed. "They kneel to you. What does it mean?" Finally, the grandpa turned his head, his gaze piercing through the human like a blade. "It means I was once the hand that held the galaxy together, and the fist that crushed it." The human's breath caught in his chest. He understood now. This was no ordinary man. This was the leader of the strongest fleet, the one whispered about in stories, the one every empire feared. And somehow, he had been living quietly as a forgotten old man in a dusty colony. The battle above grew fiercer. Enemy ships tried new tactics, swarming the old fleet with numbers. But the ancient warriors answered with discipline that no modern commander could match. Their formations shifted like flowing water, breaking through every attack. Still, the Empire had endless resources. For every ship destroyed, 2 more appeared. It was clear they would not stop until the grandpa was dead. The human's stomach twisted. He realized why the old man had asked him for help. Carrying the bag was not just about kindness. It was about trust, about passing something forward. As if sensing his thoughts, the grandpa whispered, "The bag you carried contained command tokens. The fleet awakens when they are touched by hands not stained with ambition. That is why it answered me when you carried them. That is why you stand here now." The human shook his head. "I'm just a traveler. I don't belong in this." The grandpa placed a hand on his shoulder, surprisingly firm. "You acted when no one else would. That is what makes you belong." Before the human could reply, a blast shook the colony again. One of the old fleet's cruisers fell from the sky, burning as it crashed in the far desert. The Empire's fleet roared forward, their commanders sensing weakness. The grandpa straightened his back. For a moment, his frail body seemed to burn with unseen fire. He raised both hands, and the fleet responded instantly. Their formation shifted, creating a barrier wall. Enemy beams crashed against it, but not a single ship broke rank. Soldiers on the ground slammed their weapons into the earth, chanting in a language the human did not understand. Their voices rose like thunder, shaking the colony. The Empire's commander, his face appearing on every screen, shouted, "Surrender the relics! Surrender the traitor, or your world burns!" Every eye turned to the grandpa. He stood silent for a moment. Then his voice boomed across the comms, carried to every ship in orbit. "You call me traitor, you call me relic, but it was I who built the peace you now break, and it will be I who buries your arrogance." The enemy commander's face twisted with rage. "Then die with your fleet!" The battle turned brutal. Explosions lit the sky, ships tearing apart in flashes of fire. The human stumbled, his ears ringing, his heart racing. He had never felt so small, yet so close to something that shaped destiny. The grandpa leaned on his staff now, his strength fading, but his eyes never lost their fire. "This is only the beginning," he murmured. The human stared at him, his chest heavy with fear and awe. He realized the truth. The galaxy was watching. Empires, rulers, and hidden powers would all know that the strongest fleet had returned. And he, an ordinary human, had been the one to carry the spark that woke it. Above them, the war still raged, the outcome uncertain. But one thing was clear. The galaxy's balance had shifted forever. The colony lay under the shadow of war. Explosions still echoed far above, lighting the sky with burning trails of broken ships. Yet on the ground, silence filled the streets. People hid inside, their eyes wide with fear, waiting for the end. The human stood close to the grandpa, his hands shaking, his heart heavy. He had seen battles in history records, but nothing prepared him for this. The Empire would not stop. They would send more fleets, more soldiers, until either the old commander was dead or the entire colony was destroyed. And as if to prove that thought true, movement stirred in the crowd. Figures cloaked in black slipped through the alleys, their steps silent, their eyes cold. They were assassins, sent not to fight the fleet, but to kill the man who commanded it. The human spotted the first one as the shadow raised a blade, its edge glowing with poison light. Without thinking, he shouted and shoved the grandpa aside. The blade cut across his own arm instead, leaving a deep burn. He gritted his teeth, his vision blurring, but he did not fall. The grandpa turned, his eyes flashing with rage. With a single motion of his hand, energy pulsed from the ground, throwing the assassin backward into a wall. But more were coming. Half a dozen slipped out from hiding, surrounding the small house. The human grabbed a fallen weapon. His hands trembled, but he held it firm. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice unsteady. The grandpa gave him a look that almost seemed amused. "Protecting me, child? You forget who I am." The human raised the weapon anyway. "You're not alone anymore." The assassins attacked. Blades flashed, shadows leapt, but the human fought with wild courage. He blocked clumsily, stumbled often, yet somehow managed to strike one down. Pain burned through his body, but he refused to stop. His every move screamed defiance, even against foes far stronger than him. The grandpa finally stepped forward. His voice thundered like the old days, commanding the air itself. Power rushed through the ground, shaking the assassins off balance. In seconds, they were crushed under the weight of invisible force, their bodies pinned to the earth. The grandpa turned to the human. His expression was no longer distant. For the first time, there was respect in his eyes. "You bleed for me," he said softly. "Few have ever done that." The human pressed his hand to his wound, breathing hard. "I just didn't want you to fall." Before the grandpa could answer, a sound echoed from above. It was not the Empire's fleet this time. It was his own soldiers. They landed in perfect rows surrounding the house, their weapons raised. The leader of the armored warriors stepped forward, bowing low. "Commander," he said, "the fleet has seen your companion's courage. By our code, he is now bound to you. Until his death, he shares your shield." The human's eyes widened. "What? No, But the soldiers roared in unison, slamming their weapons into the ground. Their chant filled the colony streets, echoing in the human's chest. "Shield brother! Shield brother!" The grandpa placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Do not fight it. This is not punishment. This is honor." The human shook his head. "I'm not a soldier. I can't command fleets. I don't belong here." The grandpa's gaze hardened. "Belonging is not given. It is proven. You proved it the moment you raised your arm for me." The human fell silent, his thoughts heavy. He had not meant to be brave. He had simply acted. But now, the entire strongest fleet in the galaxy had recognized him as something more than just a traveler. Above, the Empire's warships regrouped, their lights growing brighter. The grandpa lifted his eyes to the sky. They will not stop. They fear me, and they fear what you may become. More assassins will come. More battles will burn the stars. The path ahead will be blood. The human clenched his fists. Then why me? Why drag me into this? The grandpa's voice was low but sharp. Because the galaxy trusts only those who act without seeking reward. I made a vow long ago. I would never raise my fleet again, unless a stranger showed me kindness with no thought of gain. You carried my burden. You woke the fleet. Now, the galaxy watches you. The words struck the human harder than any blade. He understood now that fate had chosen him, not by blood or power, but by a simple act, helping an old man no one else cared for. But the danger was real. The assassins' bodies had barely cooled when more shadows appeared at the edge of the colony. And in the sky, flashes of light showed reinforcements arriving. Fleets from rival empires, drawn by the signal of the old fleet's return. The grandpa's soldiers formed a circle around them, ready to fight, their voices steady as stone. But even they knew it was only the beginning. The human stood taller now, though fear still gnawed at his chest. If I'm part of this, he said quietly, then I won't run. Just tell me what I must do. The grandpa looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Then stand. Because when the galaxy burns, even one man can hold the line. The colony lights flickered, the ground shaking again as new ships broke through the clouds. The human gripped the weapon in his hand tighter, his mind racing, his heart ready. He knew the storm was far from over. It was only growing darker. The colony was still trembling from the last attack when the grandpa finally spoke of his past. He sat inside his small, dust-covered home, the human beside him with his arm bandaged. Soldiers stood guard outside, their armor glowing under the light of burning skies. The human waited, his mind heavy with questions. He needed answers. Why did the fleet return? Why him? Why now? The grandpa's eyes looked far away, as if staring not at the cracked walls but at memories buried for centuries. His voice was soft at first, but every word carried weight. Long ago, I commanded them, he said. Not for glory, not for conquest, but because the galaxy was tearing itself apart. The empires fought endlessly. Millions died in every battle. I led this fleet to bring order, and we succeeded. The human leaned closer. But the history books said the fleet vanished. The grandpa nodded slowly. We vanished because I made it so. After victory, I looked at the galaxy and saw fear in every eye. Fear of me. They did not see peace. They saw chains. And I realized the fleet had become too powerful. No one should hold such power forever. So I swore a vow. I would bury the fleet in silence. I would never call them again, unless fate itself demanded it. The human frowned. And fate was me carrying your bag? The grandpa's lips curved into the faintest smile. Yes, I set a condition. Only if someone helped me with no thought of reward, no fear, no calculation, would I allow the fleet to rise again. Because such a person carries no ambition, only heart. That person was you. The human felt the words strike deep. He had acted without thinking, only helping because he saw an old man struggling. Now that single act had changed the galaxy. Outside, the sound of engines grew louder. More ships from rival empires were arriving, drawn by the signal of the awakened fleet. The soldiers at the door shifted uneasily, their hands on their weapons. The human's voice was low, almost trembling. But they'll all come for you. For us. How can we fight them all? The grandpa looked at him firmly. We do not fight to rule. We fight to protect. Remember this always. Power used for power's sake is corruption. Power used for others is duty. The human swallowed hard. His chest felt heavy. But there was something stronger building inside him. Resolve. Moments later, a soldier entered, kneeling. Commander, the High Council has sent a message. They demand your surrender, or they will unleash their full armada. The grandpa stood slowly, his body frail but his presence filling the room. Then they still fear me. Good. Fear makes them reckless. The human rose too, his hands clenching into fists. What happens if you surrender? They will execute me and take the tokens, the grandpa said. Then they will enslave the fleet to their will. Millions of worlds will fall again. The human shook his head. So we can't let that happen. The grandpa's eyes glimmered with approval. You learn quickly. Outside, the soldiers began to chant again, their voices rising like thunder. The colony shook not from fear now, but from the power of loyalty. Civilians peeked from their hiding places, their fear mixed with awe. They had seen the old fleet rise from legend. They had seen a human stand beside the commander when no one else dared. Whispers spread quickly. Perhaps hope was returning. But not everyone felt hope. Hidden among the crowd, spies sent urgent transmissions to their masters. Rival empires would not allow this legend to live again. Already, enemy fleets were on their way, faster and stronger than the first. The human stepped outside for air. He looked at the sky, where wrecks of destroyed ships burned like falling stars. The horizon glowed red, not from sunset, but from war. He clenched his jaw. He knew the grandpa was right. This was only the beginning. Suddenly, a group of children ran up to him, their eyes wide. "Mister, are we safe now? Will they leave us alone?" The human froze. He had no answer. He looked at their small faces, trembling, desperate for comfort. And before he realized it, he knelt down and nodded. "Yes, we'll keep you safe, no matter what." The words slipped from his mouth without thought. But when he said them, he felt them. He meant them. One of the children hugged him tightly before running back to her mother. The human stood slowly, staring at his hands. For the first time, he understood why the grandpa had chosen him. When he returned inside, the grandpa was waiting. "You gave them hope," the old man said. "Do you see now why it must be you? The galaxy does not need another tyrant. It needs someone who acts because it is right." The human's voice was quiet. "But what if I fail?" The grandpa's eyes softened. "Then you fail as a man who tried, and that will be more than most ever dared." The sound of new engines thundered above, louder than before. A scout rushed in, breathless. "Commander, enemy reinforcements are entering orbit. They outnumber us 3-1. The soldiers tightened their ranks, their faces grim but unshaken. The grandpa straightened, his hand resting on the human's shoulder. "This is your choice now," he said. "You can leave and live in silence, or you can stand and carry the burden with me." The human's chest burned. Fear clawed at him, but so did determination. He thought of the children's faces, of the colony trembling, of the bag he had carried without knowing its weight. Slowly he nodded. "I'll stand." The grandpa's lips curved into a rare smile. "Then the galaxy will remember this day." Outside, the sky roared as fleets gathered. The storm of war had only just begun, and the human was now a part of it. The colony's night was not dark. The sky burned with the glow of enemy ships gathering above, their lights flickering like angry stars. The air shook with the constant hum of engines. Everyone in the colony stayed inside, whispering prayers, knowing a single command could end them all. The human stood on the balcony of the old house, staring upward. His fists were tight, his heart beating fast. He had never commanded, never fought wars, never held power. Yet now the strongest fleet in the galaxy waited behind him, expecting orders. He turned when he heard footsteps. The grandpa walked out slowly, leaning on his staff. "They are coming in greater numbers," the grandpa said, his eyes on the sky. "3 empires together. Old enemies have united against us." The human swallowed hard. "Then what chance do we have? They'll crush us." The grandpa looked at him. "Chance is not always found in strength. Sometimes it is found in courage. You forget. Your choices are not bound by the logic of empires. That is why you are needed." The human shook his head. "I'm no commander." "You are now," the grandpa replied firmly, "and they will follow you." As if on cue, a soldier appeared and knelt. "Commander, the enemy has begun their approach. We await your word." The human froze. The title felt wrong in his ears. He looked at the soldier, then back at the grandpa. "What am I supposed to say?" "Say what your heart tells you," the old man said. The fleet does not need perfection. It needs truth. The human took a deep breath. He stepped forward, his voice unsteady but clear. "Tell the fleet, we fight not for conquest, not for revenge. We fight for the people below us, for the children who should not die in another war." The soldier bowed. "Your word will be carried." Moments later, the sky lit with signals. The old fleet shifted into position, forming their iron wall around the colony. The human's words had become their orders. The enemy fleet descended in perfect lines, thousands of ships stretching across the heavens. Their commander's voice thundered over comms. "Lay down your arms! Hand over the traitor and his human pet! Resist, and your colony will be dust." The human's stomach turned. He looked at the grandpa, who said nothing, his face unreadable. Then, almost without thinking, the human stepped to the comms. His voice shook, but he forced himself to speak. You want to destroy us? Then come. But remember, this fleet has fought wars before you were born, and I will not let you harm these people. Silence followed for a moment. Then laughter crackled from the enemy commander. A human boy dares to speak? Then you will die first. The first volley of enemy fire rained down. The colony trembled, shields sparking. The human clenched his fists. His mind screamed to run, to hide. But then he remembered the children's faces, the way they asked if they were safe. He straightened. Counterattack, he whispered. The grandpa nodded, his eyes glimmering with pride. Now give the order. The human raised his voice. Counterattack! The fleet obeyed. Hundreds of cannons fired at once. The night sky exploded with burning light. Enemy ships burst apart, falling like fireballs. The human staggered back, stunned by the destruction his single word had unleashed. But the Empire was not broken. Their ships surged forward in waves, faster, sharper, overwhelming. They struck from every angle, pounding the shields. Sparks rained across the colony as the shield lines flickered. They're too many, the human shouted. Then outthink them, the grandpa said sharply. Do what they do not expect. The human stared at the tactical screen. Enemy formations moved like machines, perfect and predictable. He saw a weak point, a gap they left as they curved their lines. No trained commander would try to exploit it. It was suicide. But the human's gut told him otherwise. Shift the third squadron. Break their middle, he ordered. The officer hesitated, then obeyed. The ships tore forward, diving straight into the enemy formation. For a moment, it looked like madness. But then the Empire's perfect lines shattered, their formation breaking into chaos. The human gasped. It had worked. The enemy's strength turned into confusion. The grandpa smiled faintly. Illogical to them. But human instinct is not bound by their rules. Remember that. The battle raged for hours. The human gave orders, some clumsy, some reckless, but each carried by courage. The fleet followed him with unwavering loyalty. Slowly, the enemy began to fall back, leaving burning wrecks across the sky. But victory came at a cost. Many of the old fleet's ships were destroyed, their wreckage scattering the stars. Soldiers died, chanting their commander's name until their last breath. When silence finally returned, the colony was still standing. The shields flickered weakly but held. The people stepped out from hiding, staring in awe. The human stood on the balcony, his body shaking, his throat dry. He had given orders that saved thousands and killed thousands more. His hands trembled as he whispered, "What have I done?" The grandpa placed a hand on his shoulder. You chose. That is what leaders must do. You carry the weight now. The human turned to him, tears in his eyes. I'm not ready for this. No one ever is, the grandpa said. But the galaxy has already decided. You are the shield brother now, and they will follow you until your last breath. The human looked back at the burning sky. He felt no pride, only the heavy truth that destiny had claimed him. The war was not over. It had only begun. The battlefield above the colony was quiet at last, filled with drifting wrecks of broken ships. Fires burned in the upper atmosphere, casting strange red light across the land below. The human stood at the edge of the balcony, his body trembling, his eyes unable to look away from the destruction. He had given orders that had saved thousands, but also sent many to their deaths. The weight of command pressed heavily on him. The grandpa walked out slowly, his staff tapping against the floor. His face was pale, his breath shallow, but his eyes still burned with the strength of someone who had carried the galaxy on his shoulders before. He stood beside the human, looking at the burning sky in silence. They will come again, the grandpa said at last. Today was only one battle. Tomorrow, the galaxy will rise against us. The human swallowed hard. Then what was the point? We win here, but lose tomorrow. We fight one fleet, but 3 more arrive. How do we stand against all of them? The grandpa turned to him. By remembering why you fight, not for power, not for empire, for the people below, for the children who slept tonight because of you. The human looked down. Families were coming out of hiding, gathering in the streets, staring at the sky. Some carried candles, others bowed their heads. A few whispered prayers of thanks to the fleet that had defended them. Their eyes turned to the balcony, to the human who had given orders in the darkest hour. For the first time, he saw not fear in their faces, but trust. Before he could speak, the grandpa stumbled, clutching his chest. The human rushed to hold him. "You're weak. You need rest." The old man shook his head. "No, my time is ending. The years I buried myself have caught up. This body can no longer carry the fire it once did." The human's chest tightened. "Don't say that. They need you. I need you." The grandpa gripped his arm with surprising strength. "No, they need you now. The fleet kneels to you already. They see you as shield brother, chosen not by blood, but by courage. You must lead them when I cannot." The human shook his head, his voice cracking. "I don't know how. I'm not you." The grandpa's eyes softened. "That is why you will succeed. I led with power, and it turned into fear. You lead with heart, and it turns into hope. The galaxy does not need another me. It needs you." Tears burned in the human's eyes. He wanted to argue, but deep down he knew the old man was right. The fleets had followed his reckless orders and won. The people now looked at him as their protector. Fate had chosen him, and there was no turning away. Outside, horns sounded. The soldiers of the ancient fleet gathered in perfect ranks before the house. Their leader stepped forward, bowing low. "Commander, the men await your word. The galaxy has already heard of today's battle. Every empire now knows the fleet has returned. They will march on us, but we will march with you." The human froze, his throat tight. He looked at the grandpa, who nodded faintly. "Speak. They are yours now." The human stepped forward, his legs heavy, his mind racing. Thousands of eyes watched him, waiting. He took a breath, then another, and finally raised his voice. "I am not a soldier," he began. "I am not a legend. I am just a man who carried a bag for someone in need. That is all. But today I stood beside you, and together we stopped those who wanted to burn this world. If you follow me, it will not be for conquest. It will not be for glory. It will be to protect those who cannot protect themselves. If you are ready for that, then I will stand with you until the end." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then the soldiers struck their weapons against the ground, the sound like thunder rolling across the colony. Their chant rose into the night, "Shield, brother! Shield! Brother!" The human's chest tightened. He had not asked for this, but it was his now. The grandpa leaned on his staff, his voice faint but steady. "Do you hear them? They will follow you, not because you are strong, but because you are true. That is greater than strength." The human turned to him, but the grandpa's body swayed. He caught the old man just as he sank to the floor. The soldiers gasped, but the grandpa raised a hand weakly. "Do not mourn. My time has passed. I lived long enough to see hope return, and it came not from me, but from a human." The human's throat closed. "Stay with me, please." The grandpa's eyes dimmed, but he smiled. "No, now you carry the fire. Lead them better than I did." With those words, his hand slipped away and the light in his eyes faded. The soldiers lowered their heads in silence. The human held the old man's body, tears falling freely. The fleet's supreme commander, the legend of 1,000 battles, was gone. But above them, the warships glowed like burning stars, waiting for the voice that would guide them next. Slowly, the human stood, lifting his eyes to the sky. His grief turned into resolve. He stepped forward, raising his hand the way he had seen the grandpa do. "Fleet," he said, his voice breaking but strong. "I am your commander now." The soldiers slammed their weapons to the earth again, their chant shaking the ground. The warships shifted formation in the sky, their lights blazing. The human looked up, his heart heavy but fierce. He had begun with one small favor, a simple act of kindness. Now he carried the weight of the galaxy's strongest fleet. And he knew the galaxy would never be the same again.